Well, my name's Ken Burrows. I work for a company called VIX Verify. We're based in Sydney, Australia, and we're taking our product global. And I've been told from a friend of mine who was born in New Jersey, if I screw up tonight, just to explain to people that I'm a grockle from down under. So that's the excuse. So I'm going to keep this fairly brief. I want to talk briefly about who is VIX Verify. I'll talk briefly about the identity challenge, what we see, some of the directions in the market, how we're working with the regulators in different countries and some of their responses to what we're doing, how to deliver an effective electronic verification solution, and we'll take a quick peek into the future as well. So the company VIX Verify was founded in 2005 in Canberra, Australia. It was actually founded by a professor at the local university, and this guy called Dr. Kevin Cox actually picked the eye teeth out of his class and found the best students and formed a company called Identity. And that company was based in Canberra, and we were actually focusing on voice biometrics when I joined the company. So it was actually going back 8 years ago. Focusing on voice biometrics is fairly innovative, and we found ourselves slowly moving into electronic verification. And since then, we've secured over 300 clients around the world. We do both global data and document coverage. We're moving into biometrics. We do the mobiles. There's something wrong here. It's okay. Mobiles, different types of platforms. We have offices around the globe, and it's a SaaS-based service, but I'll come to that very shortly. I just wanted to quickly touch on our EV journey. So I mentioned earlier on that when we first started, we were in the voice biometrics, and there's a bit of a story there because everyone likes to say we had this grand vision of moving into identity verification, but it was in fact voice biometrics. And my job is to sell voice biometrics to small tier, middle tier banks. And anyway, Dr. Cox, he was doing a lot of experimentation, and he built a prototype for the voice biometrics, and we're about to go into my very first demo with him. And what happened was that he sat down with me before the demo and he said, "Ken, it's really working well, watch this." And he'd created an account in the name of Dr. Kevin Cox, and he rang a number, and the voice came over the phone. It said, "Hello, who is this?" And he said, "This is Mr. Cox." And the voice came back and said, "Yes, you are verified, proceed." And he said, "See, Ken, it's working really well." And I said, "Hey, okay, let me try that." And so he passed the phone to me, and I rang the number, and the voice came back, "Yes, what's your name?" I said, "I'm Mr. Cox." And the voice came back and said, "Okay, Mr. Cox, you're okay to proceed. You've been verified." And I said to Kevin, I said, "This isn't working." And he said, "It worked okay for me, and that's the main thing." And I said, "Kevin, can I just say something? When we go into this demo, the first thing they're going to ask of me is exactly what I just did." And he said, "Oh, can you worry too much?" So we walked into this demo, and this guy I knew. It was a friendly demo site. You always want to do a friendly demo site for your first one. And I walked in, and this guy said to me, he said, "Oh, g'day Ken, how are you going?" I said, "Good." And he then turned around and said, "Okay, let's demonstrate the product." And Dr. Cox, Kevin Cox, was there in the room, and Kevin rang up this number, and he was at one end of the room, and he said, "Oh, it's..." the voice came over and said, "Who is it?" And he said, "Oh, Kevin Cox." And the voice came back and said, "You're verified." And everyone, Kevin was sitting there with a big smile on his voice, and this big burly copper was at the other end of the room, and he said, "Oh, let me try that." And this bloke rang the number, and he said, "Oh, my name's Kevin Cox." And this voice came over and said, "You're verified, Mr. Cox." And this bloke who I knew said, "Geez, Ken, I thought you would have got that frickin' right." So anyway, we walked out of that meeting and we dropped the voice biometrics. And we decided that we should focus on electronic verification. And we had an opportunity in a gaming company that was basically big business in Australia, and it was all paper-based verifications. Now, in Australia, one of the biggest businesses in Australia is gaming, and Melbourne Cup Day is one of the biggest days in Australia. It's a public holiday, and there are literally thousands upon thousands of people that register to bet on a horse, on a single race. We get 100,000 verifications in the space of 1 hour in Australia for Melbourne Cup. And all of those verifications used to be paper-based. So you can imagine the fax machine was running red hot on Melbourne Cup Day. And we replaced that with electronic verification. The first bank that went live with us was a company called UBank. And they went live with with electronic verification in 2008. And we worked quite closely with the regulators, getting them to understand our technology when we first went live with UBank. The technology at that point, there was no data sources, no government data sources available. We were screen scraping government data sites. So if you had a passport and you could check your passport somewhere on a government site, we would screen scrape that site and provide a service using screen scraping. And no one else was doing that, because most of the sites that most of the people that were providing any sort of verification was doing background verification. That is where you provide some information about yourself and it would go off and just check databases. Our verification approach has always been quite different. It was always consent driven, so the user or the end user was quite involved in the process. So they weren't being left out. They were consenting to providing some information about themselves, and we would check different data sources. UBank was an amazing success. When they went live with electronic verification, they did not have a branch you could go to. All the verification was done online. If you couldn't get through, they normally had a call centre ring you, and they would try to get you through using other credentials you may have, like what we call an Australian Medicare card or a driver's licence. You may have made a mistake typing in some data. They try to get you in verified online. Within 12 months of going live, they had 200,000 customers registered. In 2012, we had the very first site in New Zealand that went live with Green ID, and that's a site with Air New Zealand called the One Smart Card. Now, I don't know if you've seen this in Europe just yet. I know SAS have released a program because we're supporting them with the electronic verification. But a lot of the airlines, Qantas and Virgin, in our part of the world, in Australia and New Zealand, have issued cards, your loyalty card, with a debit card facility as well as the loyalty card. So you can load foreign currency. But to load currency onto those cards, you have to be verified. And we were the first company using that, providing that service in New Zealand for verifications. We did a million verifications in the space of 12 months with Air New Zealand. In 2013, I mentioned before about screen scraping. In 2013, the government actually started to release government data sources, but you had to be a registered government, it's called a GSP, a government gateway service provider, and VIX Verify became the very first GSP in Australia doing that. And then in the last 12 months, we've become the first gateway service provider for the New Zealand government. So we've been working very closely with the governments to get those credentials. VIX Verify went international in 2014. We've got all the infrastructure in place, and all we're now doing is adding global data sources to that infrastructure to support countries around the world. I'm going quite quick, I'm sorry, because Eddie gave me 10 minutes. Okay. The identity challenge is really knowing your customer online, and while doing that process, trying to reduce your compliance cost, trying to reduce the burden of doing business in Jersey, improving the customer journey, and improving compliance right across the economy. There's a few things here to note, is that when we first started, people thought the cost of compliance would increase by electronic verification. It's not true. Never been our experience, and we've done 300 of these implementations around the world. The cost of EV is actually reduces your compliance costs. There's no question about that. And by taking the electronic verification issue away from the customer, they can focus on more of the important business issues at hand. In our part of the world, and this is we're seeing this in both Singapore and Malaysia, if you do not have an electronic onboarding solution which incorporates the KYC process as part of that, you are well and truly behind the game. People will go to another site and register there. That's something that's happening. So electronic verification of identities enables quick and accurate online commerce. There's real-time identity verification. When we do the identity verification, we do all their PEP checks, KYC checks, all of those checks in real time. They're done at the time that the person registers, not at a later date. And we're ensuring that we comply with the AML, CTF or CFT legislation. One of the benefits of our technology is we can define rules for the type of service that you're offering to the clients or the demographic. So we've got clients in Australia and New Zealand that might have different types of products. Each of those products have different risk levels, and they have completely different rule sets to reflect the risk associated with those products. And that's all driven by the compliance people. So the compliance people have got some opportunity of actually defining the rules to reflect the product risk to the business. This is more of an information slide. I don't want to spend too much on this, apart from noticing that there's benefits for both the individual, the business and the government and economy. Like I said, most people, the individuals, we see a lot of sites that implement electronic verification. We provide a lot of consulting about how to do that better. It's quite noticeable, the people that do EV poorly in an online environment, because the dropout rates are really noticeable. So electronic versus human. When we first started, and this is a story I like to share. Before I joined Identity, I was working in the intelligence space, and so we were working on a project with the Department of Immigration in New Zealand, and they had an issue with fraudulent passports. And what happened was that the passports were getting manufactured in Thailand for about 200 baht. It was about 20 Australian dollars each. And the week that I visited this guy, he said, we got 200 fraudulent passports that came through their customs. And he said, Ken, have you ever seen a fraudulent passport? And he opened up the safe behind him, and they literally fell out of the safe. He picked one up and said, Ken, what do you think of this? And I had a look at the passport, and I said, oh, this is a good one. He said, no, that's a bad one. He said, have a look at the watermark on that, and look at the page 3. It was all shady. And he said, that's a really bad one. Any customs officer would pick that up. And I said, but a bank officer wouldn't. And that's what people were verifying. You used to go into a bank with a passport like that, and if the image, the face on the passport matched your face, you got an account. The data wasn't checked, the passport wasn't checked, and that's what that's the big challenge for us, to make sure that person is the right person, and the credentials they present are accurate. So when we first started, we had a big battle with the compliance people initially that said this is not as good as people coming in doing face-to-face verifications. And what we've shown over the years is that this is a lot better solution, doing electronic verifications of multiple credentials that's presented by a customer. And the data sources can be both government and private. So when we go to a country, we always endeavour to get government data sources. We think that's the best data sources to use in terms of the electronic verification. But if they're not available, you take any data sources you can, and we also check the documents that are presented. We look at the documents, we use technology to evaluate the documents for security features to see if they're valid documents for that particular country and that ID. Just some market trends that we're seeing, and we've been doing this for a long time. It's quite interesting, 3 or 4 years ago, and you probably don't hear this very often, knowledge-based verification was a big one, but that seems to have dropped off the market, off the radar completely. But we're seeing a convergence of documents, data and biometric verification, and I'll add and authentication. So what people are saying nowadays is that, how can you use the documents that everyone carries? Like everyone's got an ID document of some sort with them right now, probably a driver's license or a passport or some sort of ID document. How can you use that document to try to help prove that person's identity? And we see the convergence of documents and data, checking data from documents, and some elements about the person is the way of the future. It's going to be mobile-centric, so that solution has to sit on the mobile. We have clients in some parts of the world that are now saying we're not even worried about the web portal. It has to be mobile. We're even just forgetting the web. We're basically treating that as a legacy platform. The biometrics, the fingerprints, and the face and the voice seem to be the 3 biometrics that are really taking shape. The fingerprints at the moment, I know it's been covered by I think some of the questions. The fingerprints is really popular because a lot of the ID cards, especially through Asia, have already got fingerprints embedded in a chip. The issue with that is how do you get your fingerprint onto your mobile? All the APIs that are being used are really private at this point, so that information has become available, public. Solutions will be driven by the customer. So when we talk about verification, when you register with the customer, you'll leave something behind about yourself, whether it be a voice print, a fingerprint, an iris scan or something like that, and you'll use different types of biometrics for authentication. And that choice will be driven to some extent by you. I mean, as a customer, I'd like the opportunity of saying, I will use my fingerprint in some circumstances, like, for example, if I'm on a train, but there might be other times where I want to use my voice print. And those options will be available to the end user to make decisions on. Digital IDs, I think, is going to be something that's... We pushed this quite a long time ago. A digital ID to me is you get issued with an electronic identifier once and you can reuse that. And it will require a vault of some sort to store that information. And we're working quite closely with a company in New Zealand on some projects doing that. And the other thing is business verification, and that's a big thing in Jersey, verifying companies and trusts, because it's one thing to verify an individual. To go in and verify a trust is a nightmare. It's a really big job, and you guys know that better than me. Just quickly, we work very closely with the regulators in all the jurisdictions that we're currently represented in. In Australia, we've got the AUSTRAC, MAS in Singapore, the Ministry of Monetary Authority of Singapore, Internal Affairs in New Zealand, and the Bank of Negara in Malaysia. So they're all working quite closely with those. And typically what we do is we go in and present our solution to the regulator just to make sure they're comfortable with what we're doing. And there's two things that tend to, impress the regulator about our solution. One is it's always been consent driven. So the individuals involved in the process and they're consenting to the checks that are being undertaken. And secondly is the privacy. We don't store any data about the person. So we tend to go and check data sources about the person, not store data. So to build an effective global electronic verification solution, you really need, a whole bunch of elements coming together. The regulators defining some policy and some rules, because we tend to follow those very closely. We need data from the government. We need independent data sources, and quite often we use credit bureaus as a very rich data source. We need policy from the business, some rules from the business, and we need to make sure that the customers trust the process that we are putting forward to them. So the complete EV solution, which you'll see with Green ID, consists of a whole bunch of different components. The onboarding tools, the watch list monitoring, the AML, PEP, CDF checks, fraud detection. We've integrated components for fraud detection, so the device you're using, we monitor the IP address and the mobile device to see whether it's being used in other fraudulent activity. We've got a lot of back-end administration tools for auditing all the verifications that come through. We have a global document library with about 7,000 different types of documents, so we can check the documents that are available. We've got biometric verification with face and voice. We've implemented face, and we've got a whole bunch of global data sources. And they come together in a verification process that looks simply like this, where a customer registers with a client or with an organisation, either via the mobile or through a portal. Their details are actually checked against different data sources. They're given an opportunity to change data in case they've made some mistakes. And once the data is matched, they will get verified, and that could take up to less than 2 minutes to get verified. If a person doesn't match the rules that have been set up by the organisation, they go into a review state. Or if a person fails, they can go through your current process, which is probably manual, which is a face-to-face verification or supplying certified documents. I won't go into too much detail about the technical interaction, but I've included that so if people want a PDF of this, they can get that. And I want to do a peek into the future and see if we can get this demo working okay. So we've got the Green ID mobile app. Now this mobile app is something we've developed for demonstration purposes, and typically what will happen is that there's an SDK that would be supplied to the organisation implementing this mobile ID verification, and it would be embedded in their application process running on the mobile. I'm going to do an Australian ID check. In Australia, we've actually got 8 different types of driver's licences, and we're going to use the New South Wales one, which happens to be mine. And one thing we've learnt when we built this app, and we're piloting this app with a number of really big organisations in Asia, is that it's too descriptive. People don't read that information, so we need to make it more intuitive. So what I'm doing now is, this is explaining the process about signing up and verifying your identity, and we're asking the person to take a photograph of the front and back of their ID card. And here we say to take a good photograph you have to do the following. They never read that. And what I'm going to do is I've actually put into a library my ID. Now we're processing my driver's licence, and there's 3 things that are happening. The first thing that's doing is we're doing an OCR, optical character recognition extraction. So we're doing an OCR extraction of data from the card. Okay, that's the first thing we're doing. The second thing we're doing is we're looking at the driver's licence to make sure it's a valid driver's licence against that document library I talked about. We've got a whole bunch of templates that we're doing. And the third thing is we're extracting the facial image from that driver's licence. That's going to be used a bit later on in the process. Now what it's asking me to do is a selfie. Now I'm going to blink twice. Do you know why I had to blink twice? To prove I was alive. So I am alive. And what it's going to do now is going to present to me the data that's been extracted from my driver's licence, because I'll be given the chance of actually changing that data if the OCR didn't pick it up effectively. And I hit continue, and what it's doing now is the actual checking of that data and the facial check as well. So all the data sources that we have in the background, including PEP checks, sanction checks, the New South Wales government driver's licence database, the credit header, etc., are being checked to make sure that data is correct. And if everything is right, it should come back and say that I'm verified. And your application is verified and your face match was successful. And that's the process. And we see that as the way of the future. That's it.
So do you have any questions for Ken?
Just at the very end, when you did the demo.
Yes.
So you don't store any personal data. So was that
correct.
going back to the original database?
That's correct. That's right. And so we basically ping the databases, and the answer, what we're asking is this information right, yes or no. We get a yes or no answer, and that's it.
Okay.
And what we should point out is that the identifier, which is the driver's license number, a unique identifier, we discard. So someone can't come to the audit trail and grab your identity. It's gone.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, hello.
Hello.
As a Meriden Ladies College student, Strathfield, Sydney.
Oh, that's
I
nice.
put the question to you.
Yep.
Very, very interesting, fantastic. So, supposing the verification didn't happen,
Yep.
how do you decline and avoid the risk of tipping off?
Tipping off? I'm not sure what you mean by tipping off.
Well, when you have an obligation as a financial service business to do the due diligence on your prospective customer, if you do need to decline the business, one has to do it in a manner that carefully avoids tipping them off that there may be some suggestion that you're suspicious of the proceeds of crime.
I'm with you now.
Yeah.
So they could have been picked up on a PEP check, for example, or something like that. We leave that to the customer. So what happens is
And the customer being the financial institution?
Yes, that's right.
Or the
financial institution.
I see.
So we will have. I can tell you what some of the customers have done. Some will decline the customer and just decline them and say, we're not going to do business with you. Others have accepted the application and will track them and report it to the AUSTRAC organisation. But what we do is we ask the customer, you tell us what you want us to do. And we will, because we fit into their business process. We can do whatever the customer wants.
I see. And what about supposing you tried your driving licence and your driving licence failed, can the underlying customer, the consumer, then try a different document and potentially pass on a different test?
Yes, they can do.
And would the financial institution be notified that the first document failed? How would that communication work?
So in that situation where they present one credential and it fails and they use a second credential, those entire rules are determined by the financial institution and how they want to be reported. So it's completely.
I see.
So most organisations we deal with will allow them to just keep going until they get verified, regardless of how many credentials they use. So they just let it go.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, but they will limit it. They might say, for example, on one credential we'll allow 3 attempts, and if it doesn't work, we'll push them away, or maybe 5 attempts over 3 credentials. Everyone's got different rule sets, so it's up to them to make a decision. The compliance people have to think about what they want to do.
Okay, can I pop in a third one?
Yeah, of course.
And so, under the regulatory regimes in this part of the world, there's different levels of information required according to the risk rating of the customer. How would you move on to a higher level of verification requirements? Yeah, well, what happens is when a customer registers, a certain risk profile might be attached to that customer, and that will invoke a different rule set. So if they've got a higher risk, they could have rule set X, and rule set X requires different checks and more stringent checks. So you can apply different rules based on a product, a demographic, country or a person. Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
No problems.
Hi there. Thank you. That was a really, really interesting presentation. I was just wondering about updating information that's kept. Do you leave that to the customer or does the tool do it for you?
When you say updating, what are you referring to?
So going back to, again, kind of what Helen was saying, in this part of the world, the regulatory regime requires that you must keep the information on the individual up to date and current. Does the tool assist with that? Or is that something that's just left to the customer to do?
So things like a change of address, it would be classic.
Change of address, change of passport, change of any of the documents that you've used or any of the information you've used to verify the identity.
We can re-verify customers, so we can actually have a process where people go back every 3 months and automatically re-verify customers. It doesn't automatically do that without some sort of back-end process that we implement, but it can be done that way.
Thank you.
Hi there, yeah. Just like to ask, who samples your data to ensure that it hasn't been compromised?
Our data. We don't store data.
Yeah, but
so the data we use is in the government databases or credit headers or stuff like that.
Yeah, but who can actually verify that your procedures have picked up the correct data?
Yeah. Well, what typically happens is the clients will actually do internal tests of our system. So because it's rule live checking, rule live tests, you can't say, let's use Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse. You have to actually use proper credentials. So what the customers quite often do is an internal test where they nominate 20 or 30 employees and actually go around and use their credentials. And so that's how it's normally tested.
Hi. One question, maybe it's more of a clarification for me. This is really a one step toward verification, but does not create a long-term in terms of a fundamental difference between the role of a trusted supplier, the TSP, so a CA, correct?
Correct, that's right.
So
Yes.
but I can see this being used in an environment where you need to create that verification from a remote standpoint, because it's becoming a big issue around TSPs.
Yep, correct.
Okay, Ken, thank you very much then. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you, everyone.
Very good.